Hi everyone, Erica of Confident Parenting popping on today to answer more of your burning sleep questions. So far, I have answered some questions dealing with preschoolers and school-age children. So today I wanted to answer a question about a younger child, but really whatever age child you have, this might be a concern for you. Today's question comes from Heather, who writes, my 8-month-old sleeps from about 6:15 p.m. to 4:45 a.m. and I cannot get him to sleep later. How can I shift his schedule to get him to sleep to at least 5:30, preferably 6? Really, anything later than what he's doing now would help. So Heather, I feel for you. My son also went through a phase where he was waking super early, first in the 5 o'clock hour and then the 4 o'clock hour, and I have not forgotten how difficult that was. So hopefully we can figure out together today what is going on, and the rest of you that might be struggling with early rising, maybe you'll hear some things in my comments that will help you as well. So Heather, there are several common causes of waking too early, and in my opinion, too early is anything before 6 a.m. or before your child has had the appropriate total amount of sleep overnight. That could also be too early. So given that your baby is sleeping, falling asleep around 6:15, and assuming that he needs about 11 or 11 and a half hours of sleep, I agree that waking at 4:45 is way too early for several reasons. So what could be causing that then? I don't think in your situation this would apply, but just for the benefit of anybody else who might be listening and watching, one thing to make sure of, especially at this time of year, is that light is not filtering in and causing a child to wake too early. I haven't been awake at 4:45 in a long time, but I'm certain that it's not light at that time, so I don't think that's the problem with your son. But for anybody else, just notice what it looks like in the room if your child's waking too early, and if you think that the summer early light filtering in could be a factor, just do whatever you need to do to block that light out. Even some blackout curtains are really more just like dim out curtains, not completely blackout. So you may need to add another layer, tack a blanket up in front of the windows, take some thick black trash bags and tape behind the curtains and around the window frame. So that would be sort of the easiest, quickest thing to think about in many scenarios. But Heather, I don't think that's a problem for you at 4:45. So the next thing to think about when you have an early riser is it possible that your child is too tired, even a tad too tired, by the time they fall asleep at night? And too tired at night can result from several things. Maybe not enough daytime sleep, or too long of a wakeful period from the time your child ends their naps to the time that they fall asleep for bedtime, or a bedtime that's just too late on the clock for what your child is programmed for internally. We all have an internal clock that kind of dictates when we should be awake, when we should feel sleepy, and sometimes, unbeknownst to us, the bedtime that we've set up for our child is just a little too late on the clock. And all of those things can cause our child to wake too early the next morning. I understand that that's super counterintuitive, and welcome everybody that's joining me right now. It does not make sense on a logical adult level that if our child is overtired when they fall asleep at night, that they would wake up too early the next morning. We as adults, if we're too tired when we fall asleep, we tend to crash, we sleep hard, we sleep in if they let us, which they don't, but we would if we were given the opportunity. With kids and with babies, it almost always works the opposite way. The more tired they are when they fall asleep, the more likely they are to pop up way too early and just be unwilling or unable to go back to sleep in the morning. So Heather, bringing that back to your situation, you already have a very early bedtime of 6:15. I doubt that it's too late on the clock for your child. What I don't know is what your son's daytime sleep looks like. I don't know if he's getting enough nap sleep. I don't know when naps are ending and how long that period is from the end of naps to bedtime. At 8 months, I usually find that they kind of max out anywhere between 2 and 4 hours of wakefulness leading up to bedtime. So if he's a 2 nap-a-day guy, he can probably comfortably manage being awake for 4 hours from the end of his naps to the start of bedtime. So assuming that naps are ending at 2:15 or later, your 6:15 bedtime is probably fine, and that's probably not causing the early rising. But again, for anyone else's benefit, if you notice that your child is awake too long, bedtime's falling late on the clock, or they just seem really tired by the time they fall asleep, that would be the first thing I would try to address to fix the early rising problem. And again, it seems really backwards. it's interesting to note that I hardly ever help a family fix an early rising problem by addressing the early rising. We're usually fixing it by addressing daytime sleep, the timing of bedtime, how a child goes down at bedtime, and that sort of thing. So you do really need to look at the whole picture to figure out a pesky problem like early rising. So if he's not getting enough daytime sleep, that could make his 6:15 bedtime, even though you really can't go earlier than that, he could still be overtired by that bedtime. So if that's the case, and I would like to see him get about 3 hours on the day, maybe 2 90-minute naps or something similar to that. If that's not happening, that's the first thing that I would address to try to fix the early rising. If he's just not getting enough daytime sleep, you're going to be hard-pressed to see him sleep later the next day. And how to fix that, I'd have to ask you a bunch more questions about how naps are happening. So that could definitely be a factor, being overtired by the time he falls asleep at bedtime, and having him go down appropriately tired, less tired, could be the key to fixing the early rising. Another thing that can cause waking up too early in the morning is how he falls asleep initially at bedtime, meaning, is he having some help to get to sleep at bedtime? Is he having lots of help to get to sleep at bedtime? Or is he totally doing the process on his own based on his own skills? And I ask this not because it's bad or wrong to help your child to sleep at bedtime, but because it takes a certain level of skill to fall asleep at the beginning of the night, but it takes a bigger level of skill to fall back to sleep in the early morning at, say, 4 or 5 a.m. So, and the reason for that is because the pressure, what we call the sleep pressure or the drive to sleep, is lessened. If he wakes up at 11 p.m. and has to put himself back to sleep, no big deal, he's still really tired. But if he wakes up at 4 a.m. and needs to fall back to sleep, he's had so many hours of sleep by then that the pressure or the drive to sleep is greatly reduced. So it kind of takes a master level of skill to stay and return to sleep in the early morning hours. The other thing that's tricky about the early morning is in the beginning of the night, he's spending more time in deep sleep, and the transition between those sleep cycles fall less frequently. However, from about 4 o'clock on, he's cycling more frequently through lighter sleep cycles. So we have this difficult scenario of, I've had lots of hours, so my pressure to sleep is lessened, plus I'm cycling more frequently, which means more opportunities to wake up, and I'm cycling through lighter sleep cycles, so also more opportunities to wake up. So the biggest reason I see babies waking too early and not being able to get back to sleep is they just kind of have a white belt level of sleep skills, and we want them to have a black belt level of sleep skills to get through those difficult hours in the early morning. So I would think about, Heather, what the bedtime process looks like. Is he too tired? And if you're helping in any way, is that something that you could, either gradually, or if you don't want to go gradually, maybe less gradually, work your way out of? If you are rocking him to sleep, feeding him to sleep, that's something that might need to be addressed in order to fix your problem. Even if you're just doing something really simple like, patting him a little bit, maybe offering a pacifier that he can't find on his own. Again, none of those things are bad in and of themselves, but if he needs you to do that in the easier spot for falling asleep at bedtime, he's probably going to look for that at 4:45, and it might not work because the sleep pressure is lessened and he might say, I'm ready to get up for the day. So really taking a peek at how much help your child needs to get to sleep can help over time to fix an early rising problem. 2 more things I wanted to talk about to address this issue. I don't know, Heather, from your question, if this is a new and sudden problem, or if it's something that's just, has he always been an early riser, or did this happen suddenly? And again, I say this for everyone else's benefit too. If this is a sudden early rising and he used to sleep much later, it could be a temporary response either to a transition from more naps to less naps. For example, if he used to take 3 and he has recently adjusted or is adjusting to only taking 2. Sometimes there's an overtiredness that results from a nap transition that will temporarily cause early rising. Another thing that could temporarily cause early rising is physical or cognitive development. So if, for example, he just figured out how to crawl or just figured out how to pull to a stand, the brain and the body get so excited about this new skill, and baby just wants to practice all the time. And sometimes that causes sleep to take a back seat temporarily, and we often see the results of that in the early morning. Baby wakes up, he's had, 9 hours or whatever it is, and he says, whoo, I'm ready to go, I want to practice, and nothing you do is going to get him back down. So that's a scenario where maybe none of these things need to be addressed or changed. It's just a temporary thing that you kind of have to wait out and get through. If it is a more chronic problem, then it would we'd be looking at the things that I talked about initially. The last thing that I'll say about early rising, let's assume that you ensure that your child's not overtired heading into bedtime. You make sure there's no light filtering in to wake them. You make sure that their sleep skills are black belt level so they can stay and return to sleep at that difficult time. All those things are the key to fixing this. However, there's one more piece of advice that I have for you, and this is probably the hardest piece of advice. When your child's waking early, it's really easy to kind of say, I'm doing everything I can be doing, just throw my hands up in the air. Whenever he gets up, we'll just get up. And that might be a more pleasant way to start your day than forcing him to stay in there until a set time. However, our internal clocks are really programmed by light and activity, or the lack of light and activity. So when you're dealing with an early rising problem, while you're addressing all the other things that I mentioned, it really is key to keep your child in their sleep space, in their dark room, until a set time each morning. If, for example, you want your child to sleep until 6, but they are waking up at 5, and when they wake up at 5, you say, fine, forget it, there's no point in doing any of this, I'm just going to get you up, and you go downstairs and turn on the lights and start the day's activities. Unfortunately, while that might be the easiest path, and I totally understand doing that, and to be honest, I've done it myself, but unfortunately, each time they get up and are exposed to activity and light at that early hour, it just further ingrains the habit, and it sends a message to the body of, yes, this is the time that we get up every morning, and it makes it more likely that that will happen going forward, and less likely that the other things you're doing to fix the problem are going to have a positive effect on the early morning wake time. So in addition to all the other things we talked about, it really would help to have a set time, let's say 6 a.m. or whatever you think is reasonable based on your child and the specifics of your scenario, and say, look, I'm going to keep him in his crib, in his dark room, or in his bed if you have an older child, until this set time, whether or not he returns to sleep. And that's the hard part. If you keep your child in their sleep space until a set time, they may not go back to sleep, and that will not feel successful. That will feel frustrating. However, the success in that is that you're not further ingraining the habit. So it still is a good habit to keep, even if it's not resulting in him going back to sleep, because you will avoid telling the body, yes, this is the very, very early time when we wake up. And obviously, that's much easier said than done, but I'm just here to say it. So that's the luxury that I have. So hopefully that gives you some things to think about. If you have a child who's waking too early, you would want to focus on how tired are they when they fall asleep, how skilled are they at getting to sleep and back to sleep, and then keeping them in there until a set time every morning. And one thing I didn't mention is, while you are keeping them in there till a set time every morning, what happens during that time is very much up to you. So you might be trying to help them back to sleep. You might be leaving them to try to return to sleep on their own. You might be coming in and out of the room at intervals to say, I love you, I hear you, I'm close by, but it isn't time to wake up. So that's kind of specific to each family and what you feel comfortable doing during that time. I know that, Heather, you've been trying. I'm not sure exactly what you've been trying or what that's been looking like. Some babies really do best when you aren't there and you kind of just let them work that out, on their own. So hopefully that gives you some things to think about. I am trying to pop on at least once a week to answer everybody's most burning sleep questions. So if you have one, feel free to post it on my Confident Parenting Facebook page or in the comments of this video below, and I will be back to answer some more of them. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.